Kate sat in court, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of a door finally closing. Across the table, Bayo leaned back in his chair, smirking as though he had won a long game. He tapped the pen twice on the table before signing the divorce papers with a careless flick, chuckling, "Finally, I'm free from your dead weight." The room went silent. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause its slow turn until the judge cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, there is one more financial detail to read," the judge said, voice firm but calm. Bayo's smile faltered as the words began to spill like slow rain. The property titles, the hidden investments, the shares Kate's late father had placed in her name before she even met Bayo. With each detail, Bayo's smirk cracked a little more. "Dear viewers, please subscribe to our channel for more stories, as it helps us grow. And also, let me know which country you are watching me from in the comments." Kate kept her face steady. She had walked in ready to start over, but not empty-handed. The world would know she wasn't walking out broke, she was walking out richer than Bayo had ever imagined. She thought back to when it all began. Kate met Bayo when she was just 22, a bank trainee with big dreams of her own. She was full of love and light, believing in the beauty of building a future together. From their first date, she gave everything. Bayo had wild plans for a tech company, and Kate stood beside him without question. Her own dream was to start a fashion brand. But she pressed it aside, believing his vision was their vision. She worked long hours at the bank by day, then came home to cook, clean, and listen to his endless ideas. When they couldn't pay the rent, she quietly sold her grandmother's gold earrings. She told herself this was what true partnership meant. If he rose, they rose together. She never once felt weak for sacrificing. She trusted that all the love, time, and effort she poured in would circle back to her. But as the years rolled by, she began to see the small signs, the late-night messages he hid, the way he avoided her gaze when she asked simple questions. Still, she stayed quiet and watched. She remembered everything. When Bayo's app finally caught fire, their lives changed overnight. News channels wanted interviews. Big conferences sent invitations. Money flowed like the rainy season river, and as his world grew larger, Kate's place in it grew smaller. The man who once held her hand proudly now walked ahead of her like she was a stranger. At parties, he introduced her as someone who helps around, never as his wife. Guests looked past her as if she were just part of the furniture. She stayed silent, watching him laugh with new friends, each grin carving her deeper. Then, one evening, she heard words sharper than a blade. In front of his friends, Bayo laughed and said, "Kate? She was just a phase." Kate had smiled then, but inside she marked every word, every slight, every wound. They all laughed with him. No one turned to look at Kate's face. No one saw the pain that swam behind her eyes. She stood with the tray of puff puff and suya sticks balanced in her hands, feeling smaller than the shadow of a child. The music in the living room pulsed against her ribs, but it was Bayo's voice that drowned everything. It was as if she had become invisible. The man she loved, the man she once prayed for when the lights were cut off, now acted like she was only passing through his life, a helper, a stranger. He didn't see the woman who had stayed when there was nothing but borrowed rent and second-hand shoes. He didn't see the nights she sold her mother's gold to keep food on the table. He only saw someone who no longer fit in his shiny new world. But Kate didn't scream. She didn't cry in front of them. She simply took it all in every careless laugh, every word that made her feel like air. She stood still, but inside, something had started to change. Her heart was breaking, yes. Yet behind the ache, a quiet fire flickered, small but alive. When the last guest left and the house settled into silence, Kate washed the plates alone. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She dried her hands, walked past Bayo, who was already on his phone, and went to bed without a word. He didn't even notice. That night she couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan hummed while Lagos traffic whispered far away, but her mind would not rest. Near midnight, Bayo came home again after another late meeting. She heard the front door click, and his shoes drag across the tiles. He didn't come to the bedroom. Instead, his voice rose from the living room, deep and careless. Kate sat up. She didn't mean to listen, but his laughter carried down the hallway. Something in his tone made her stop at the doorway, her feet cold against the floor. "Guy, you know me now," Bayo said, voice thick with pride. "Kate is sweet, but a beg. I deserve better these days. A woman who matches my level." The words struck like a slap. Kate froze. Her heart did not shatter loudly. It cracked in silence, like dry wood breaking in the dark. She waited for tears, for rage, for a scream to rise, but nothing came. Only stillness. Slowly, she turned away from the hallway and walked to the small spare room at the end of the flat, a space she had not entered in years. It smelled of dust and forgotten light. This had once been her creative corner, the place where she sketched dresses and dreamed of a fashion line carrying her name across Africa. 6 years. 6 long years since she last touched the silver laptop sleeping on the old wooden table. 6 years since she folded her dream to help Bayo climb. Her fingers trembled as she wiped the thin layer of dust and flipped the lid open. The screen flickered, then glowed. She searched through old folders until she found one that made her throat tighten. Dream Designs by Kate. Click, colours burst across the screen, bright Ankara patterns, bold lines, flowing gowns inspired by the markets of Lagos and the quiet grace of village weddings. Her past stared back, untouched, waiting like a loyal friend. A slow smile stretched across her face. Not joy, not yet, but power, quiet and certain. This folder was her, the real Kate. The girl who once believed her own hands could create beauty before she began using them only to serve another person's vision. She didn't say anything to Bayo that night. She didn't tell him she had heard every word. She simply sat in the glow of her designs, heart steady. If he thought she wasn't enough, that was fine. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to fight. She was going to rise, not to prove him wrong, but to remind herself she had always been more than someone's phase. And while Bayo laughed in the next room, thinking she remained in the shadows, Kate was already stepping quietly back into her own light. For the next 18 months, Kate lived 2 lives so carefully separated that even she sometimes marveled at her own calm. In the daylight, she wore silence like a well-fitted dress. She cooked, cleaned, and smiled at the neighbours when they greeted her. She listened when Bayo spoke about his latest deals, nodded at the right places, and played the part of the quiet wife so perfectly that nobody guessed a single thing had changed. But when night settled over Lagos and the traffic softened to a low hum, the real Kate came alive. As soon as Bayo drifted into the heavy snore of deep sleep, she would slide from their bed, her feet bare against the cool tiles. In the spare room, the one that smelled faintly of old fabric and forgotten dreams, she opened her laptop and stepped into another world. Sometimes she worked until the call to prayer floated across the city at dawn. Her hands moved with purpose, sketching dresses that carried the heartbeat of African markets and the grace of village ceremonies. She watched endless tutorials on sewing, branding, and online marketing. Slowly, she rebuilt the dream she once buried. She created a new name, bold and mysterious, KT Studio. No one knew the face behind it. Using a quiet online store, she released her first digital collection. At first, there were only a few curious orders, one from Abuja, another from Accra, but then the comments began to glow. Unique, authentic, beautiful cut. Each praise was a small flame of encouragement. While Kate stitched a future in secret, Bayo began a podcast. He called it Rise, Win with Bayo, and he loved to talk about serious business. More than once, he mocked women who tried to start companies. Most of them are just playing dress-up, he told his guests, laughing loud enough for Kate to hear from the kitchen. She would sit in the corner pretending to scroll through her phone, each careless word sliding under her skin. But instead of breaking her, his arrogance became fuel. Every joke about women founders pushed her to work harder. She wasn't building a brand to punish him. She was building to remind herself that her voice, her hands, her vision still mattered. And the best part was that Bayo, so full of himself, had no idea. Every night she worked, every sale she shipped, every investor who emailed her was a quiet victory. One warm afternoon, memories of gentler days nudged her heart. Back when they were newly married, she often surprised Bayo with lunch at his office. Maybe, she thought, she could try once more to share a simple kindness. Perhaps a small spark of the old love might still be hiding somewhere. She packed his favorite meal jollof rice bright with pepper and grilled tilapia and hailed a cab across the island. The office building gleamed like polished steel under the Sunday. Kate walked in with a small, hopeful smile, but Bayo wasn't there. Behind the reception desk sat his secretary, a young woman Kate had seen once or twice in passing. Today, the woman leaned back in her chair, her face freshly powdered, her eyes sharp with something close to amusement. "Hello," Kate said softly. "I brought lunch for Bayo." The woman's gaze dropped to the food bag, then slid back up with a smirk. Her hand rested on a small curve beneath her blouse, a curve Kate's eyes could not ignore. "You're the wife," the woman said, almost laughing. "Wow, he told me you were just his sick cousin." For a heartbeat, the room tilted. Kate felt the words hit like a stone. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the lunch bag until it cut into her palm. But her face remained calm, a mask of still water. She didn't argue, she didn't cry. She simply nodded once, turned, and walked out with slow, steady steps. Outside, the Lagos sun pressed hot against her skin. She took a deep breath, pulled out her phone, and called her lawyer. "It's time," she said, her voice level. That single moment was not the end of her. It was the true beginning. Something inside her, something that had been caged by duty and silence, finally broke free. From that day, she moved with new certainty. The woman who had once begged for scraps of affection was gone. Kate was now the woman who chose herself. When she filed for divorce, Bayo barely blinked. He strutted through the days with the arrogance of a man convinced he had already won. To his friends he boasted that she would return, humbled and desperate. "She will ask for alimony," he said during one of his podcast recordings. "I will reject her. Let her learn a lesson." He pictured her as the same quiet wife, with no life outside his shadow. He laughed at the thought of her surviving without his money. But while he mocked, Kate's empire grew. Investors signed deals. Orders poured in from Nairobi, Johannesburg, London. Under the name KT Studio, she became one of the fastest-rising fashion entrepreneurs in the country. Articles praised the brand's fearless African elegance, and influencers wore her designs at festivals from Lagos to Dakar. Bayo never noticed. Not once did he ask why she seemed busier, why she no longer waited for him at the door. The morning of the final divorce hearing broke with a pale Lagos Sunday. Kate rose before dawn, as she often did, and dressed without rush or flourish. A soft cream boo-boo, her hair wrapped neatly in a deep green gelée. No jewels, no heavy makeup. There was no need to shine. Her presence would speak for itself. In the courthouse corridor, the air smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant. Bayo arrived moments later, striding in with the swagger of a man certain the game was already won. He wore dark sunglasses indoors and a suit loud enough to draw glances. His smile was wide, his laughter easy, like someone greeting fans on a red carpet. He leaned toward his lawyer and whispered, "Just hand her the papers. She's not getting a thing." Kate sat at the opposite table, hands folded in her lap. Calm, quiet. There was tiredness in her eyes. Months of late nights building KT Studio had left their mark, but behind the weariness lay a strength that didn't need to shout. The judge entered, black robe brushing the floor, and the room settled into a hush. He began the formalities, voice steady over the low hum of the ceiling fan. Then he looked up, meeting Kate's gaze. "Madam, do you have any assets or claims to declare before we proceed?" The question hung in the air. Chairs creaked as people shifted. Even Bio raised an eyebrow, puzzled. He hadn't expected her to speak. Kate stood slowly, a quiet grace in every movement. She reached into her handbag and brought out a thick folder. Without a word, she passed it to her lawyer, who stepped forward and handed it to the judge. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the judge flipped through the pages. These documents show ownership of a company registered as KT Studio, he began, scanning the papers. Statements of earnings, international brand contracts, investor agreements. He read on, voice growing more deliberate with each detail. Revenues in the millions, plans for expansion into other African countries, signed partnerships with global fashion houses. People leaned forward in their seats. Even the clerks paused in their writing. Bayo removed his sunglasses. The confident smile faltered. The judge continued. KT Studio is a rapidly growing fashion company, recently valued at over $18 million. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Bayo blinked, confusion clouding his face. KT Studio? He muttered under his breath. He had heard the name once or twice on social media, dismissed it as just another trend. Now the letters seemed to burn. He turned toward Kate, eyes searching for a hint of the woman he thought he knew. She met his gaze calmly, her expression unreadable. Leaning closer, Bayo whispered, almost to himself, KT Studio is yours? Kate tilted her head slightly. Her voice was soft, steady. It always was. You just never asked. It was the first real smile she had worn in years. A small, peaceful curve of her lips, not of victory or revenge, but of quiet truth finally uncovered. That single sentence struck harder than any shout. For years she had stood beside him, silent and invisible, while he never once thought to ask about her dreams. All the nights she spent sketching, learning, building, he had missed them, because he never cared to look. Now, in front of strangers and the law, he was forced to witness the strength he had ignored. The judge read on, confirming the legitimacy of every document. With each figure, each partnership, each investor, the weight in the room grew heavier. Bayo's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Kate remained composed. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply let the truth speak, and it spoke louder than all the boasts Bayo had ever made on his podcast. When the judge finished, the silence was thick enough to touch. Bayo leaned back, eyes fixed on her as if seeing her for the first time. The man who once bragged about teaching her a lesson now sat speechless, the lesson his to learn. After everything came out, the proceedings turned to the division of property. Legally, Kate could have claimed a great deal. The house with its polished marble floors, the luxury car parked in the driveway, the furniture, the electronics, the savings accounts. Everyone in the room seemed to expect it. But when asked for her demands, Kate shook her head gently. I want nothing that belongs to him, she said. Her voice carried, quiet yet unmistakable. A murmur swept through the gallery. She continued, the house is full of memories I no longer need. The car, the watches, the furniture, they mean nothing to me. I only ask that what I have built remains untouched. The judge nodded, noting her statement. Bayo stared, still pale. This was not the pleading wife he had imagined. This was a woman who had already moved beyond him. Kate's lawyer confirmed that all she required was recognition of KT Studio as solely hers. No spousal support, no share of Bayo's assets, no hidden conditions. The contrast between them was striking. Bayo, once the star of their story, now looked small in his tailored suit. Kate, dressed simply, seemed larger than the room itself, not in size, but in presence. She had no need to win a battle. She had already won her life back. When the hearing concluded, the judge thanked both parties and closed the file. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Kate stood, smoothing the fabric of her boo-boo. She felt the weight of the past slip from her shoulders. Bayo remained seated, eyes distant, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Kate did not look back. She didn't need to. Her words and her work had already said everything. Outside, the late morning sun bathed the courthouse steps in gold. The city buzzed with the rhythm of traffic and street vendors calling out their wares. Kate inhaled deeply, the air warm and alive. She carried nothing from that courtroom except her own freedom and the knowledge that she had never truly been powerless. KT Studio was hers, a brand loved across borders, a business born from sleepless nights and unshakable resolve. Customers wore her designs with pride, investors sought her vision, and now the world knew the face behind the name. She had not only kept her dignity, she had built an empire. Most of all, she carried something far more valuable than property or wealth: peace. It was a peace no court could grant and no betrayal could steal. It was the quiet certainty of a woman who had faced loss, found herself, and chosen her own beginning. Kate stepped off the courthouse stairs into the bright Lagos afternoon, her heart light, her path clear. The city felt new, like a map waiting for her next move. This was not the end of anything. It was, at last, the true start of her story. Bayo couldn't look away from the magazine cover. The waiting room around him faded into a blur of muted voices and the hum of an air conditioner. All he saw was Kate, her poise, her calm strength, the confidence in her eyes. She wasn't smiling widely. She didn't have to. Her presence on the page said everything. He turned the pages slowly, reading every word. The article described KT Studio's latest collection, inspired by African heritage and modern design. It highlighted her global partnerships, the Paris showcase, and the way she had quietly reshaped the fashion scene. Reporters called her the silent storm, a visionary who worked without noise and conquered with grace. Every paragraph hit Bayo like a stone. Memories of his own careless words echoed in his mind, the jokes on his podcast, the dismissive laughs, the nights he ignored her while she sketched ideas in the dim glow of her laptop. He had once said women like her were just playing dress-up. Now the world was dressing in her designs. For a moment, Bayo felt an ache he couldn't name. It wasn't just regret. It was the realization that he had never truly known the woman he married. He had lived beside her, but never saw her. He thought about the times she sat quietly while he bragged about his own plans, how she never interrupted when he made her small. He wondered how many nights she stayed awake, working while he slept, creating something he was too blind to notice. The receptionist called his name, breaking his thoughts. He put the magazine down carefully, almost afraid to crease the page. As he stood, he caught his reflection in the glossy surface of the table expensive suit, polished shoes, and eyes that suddenly looked tired. For the first time in years, he felt small. Meanwhile, across the continent, Kate's life moved with a rhythm of purpose. In her quiet hotel suite, the city lights of Johannesburg stretched beneath her like a sea of stars. She finished zipping her suitcase and checked her flight details for Paris. Her assistant placed the same magazine on the desk, the cover catching the warm lamplight. "You've seen this?" the assistant asked with a grin. Kate smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held stories. "Yes," she said, her voice soft. "It's beautiful work." She picked up the magazine but didn't linger on the photos of herself. Instead, she traced the headline with a fingertip: "Africa's most mysterious fashion queen." The words didn't make her heart race or swell with pride. They felt steady, like confirmation of something she had always known deep down. Her worth was never tied to someone else's recognition. Kate set the magazine aside and looked out the window, the city glittering like 1,000 quiet dreams. "They thought I was quiet," she whispered, "but I was just focused." Her assistant smiled again. "Paris is waiting," she said. Kate nodded, shoulders relaxed. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about honoring the woman she had always been, the woman who turned silence into strength, who built an empire while the world wasn't watching, and who now walked into her own light, one graceful step at a time. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments, and please subscribe to this channel.